Welcome to the newest episode of the Giants Huddle podcast. My name is John Schmeelk. We have a new member of the Giants Huddle family. I had a chance to catch up with him at the NFL Combine and meet him in Indianapolis. Now he's joining us to talk some NFL draft. His name is Chad Reuter from NFL.com. You know him well from his 4-round mocks. They give him the hard work, not these easy 1-round mocks that Lance Zierlein's putting out. I mean, no, they give this guy the tough assignments. He joins us from Wisconsin. Chad, it's good to talk to you, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. I prefer to view them as the fun assignments, like the puzzles, the 1,000-piece puzzles nobody else wants to take on of some Scottish castle somewhere. That's what I do. So that's the fun part.
A man that enjoys pain. I appreciate that, Chad.
Yeah, I do.
Just a reminder, you can find the Giants Huddle podcast on giants.com/podcast, the Giants app, and on your favorite podcast platforms. And remember, folks, if you like draft content, go subscribe to the Draft Season podcast. It's on a separate podcast feed. It's no longer on the Giants Huddle feed, so make sure you guys go check that out. All right, Chad, you had a 4-round mock come out about a week ago. You had a lot of trades, man. You talk about having fun. You had some fun with this. And a lot of it was for quarterback. So I'm curious if this was just an exercise you wanted to do to see how the draft would look if this happened, or if you really think, I think you had 5 quarterbacks in the first round, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
If you think this is how this is going to go.
Well, I think this is what every mock draft that anybody does is simply one scenario out of dozens of different scenarios that can play out. It's mind-numbing how many scenarios you can think of if you think about it for a while. But you know what? Every year there are 5 or 6 trades in a draft, and that's why I try to project that many, just to give us an idea, because nobody, every year it seems like people are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that happened." But I'm like, if you just look at history, stuff like this happens. Last year, for example, I projected the Bears to trade with the Giants so that the Bears could go up and get a quarterback. I don't know how many messages I saw saying the Giants never trade down. It's not going to happen, blah, 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 blah. Well, stuff happens, right? So that's why I like to do it. But in terms of the quarterbacks, I like the quarterbacks a lot more than other people do. I think they're all very talented. Are they all guaranteed to turn out? No, of course not. But if you get a 30 to 40% chance of getting a really good starting quarterback in the league, I think you have to take that shot in the first round. You don't want to rate. We've seen so many examples of teams that decided not to take a quarterback. Then the next year they're looking for one. And the year after that, they're
Panthers.
So I think I like Sam Howell a lot. A lot of people don't. That's fine. I think he's got a lot of talent. So I project him in the first round. A lot of people don't. Desmond Ridder, I've had in the first round for a while. People are starting to warm up to that a little bit more now. Same with Matt Corral going early. People didn't think that was going to. So I think it's just this time of year. People love to hate quarterbacks and pick all the things that they do wrong without taking a big picture look and saying, look, these guys have talent. We can work with them. So that's, I think the quarterbacks will go higher than people think. But teams are weird sometimes in what they think going into a draft. So no guarantees.
Yeah, and we're going to stick with the first round here for a bit, but I really want to dig deep with Chad because he really does a lot of deep work on this draft. We'll do a lot of second, third, fourth round talk today with Chad. But just FYI, I think if Giant fans see what you did here and they look at the results, they'd be throwing a parade down Fifth Avenue in New York City because you have them trading down with the Saints from number 5, the Saints coming up to get their quarterback, and the Giants walk away from this draft with Kayvon Thibodeau, who a lot of people think is the best defensive end in this draft class, depending who you talk to. They walk away with Derek Stingley, who by far has the best single year of tape of any cornerback in this class. Maybe not the last 2 years, but his freshman year. And Charles Cross, who I think a lot of people believe might be the best pass protector in this draft class. Boy, this worked out pretty well for the Giants, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think that's, I'm not sure that the Giants want to get out of 5 or 7. I mean, because you get a chance to get 2 elite prospects. And so, but when somebody dangles 2 mid-first round picks in front of you, and if they think that some of these quarterbacks are going to go early, then push some of these other guys back into the middle of the first round, then they have to listen, I think. And, a trade like that hasn't happened in 20 years. So I wrote that right in the mock draft. I'm like, look, this hasn't happened in a long time, but things happen that haven't happened in a lot. Things like that happen all the time. So it would be really interesting. I think they'd have to listen if they don't stay at the top of the draft. I think that would be a great. Kansas City's another team that's going to try to move up, maybe with 2 first-round picks, and so we might see some weird stuff going on this year. And it's fun to think about the possibilities.
Now, if the Giants do want to move down, Chad, and you talk about multiple picks this year, I think the Giants would like to pick up picks in next year's draft, right?
Sure.
Who do you think some of the teams might be besides the Saints that could be looking to move up to 5 and 7 that maybe Giant fans should be keeping an eye on?
Sure. Seattle, if they want a quarterback, they want to get ahead of Carolina. If they think Carolina is going to take a quarterback, which isn't for certain, they may trade for Jimmy Garoppolo or something. But let's just say that teams are going to assume that they don't want to take the chance of losing out on their guys, the way I put it. So Atlanta and Seattle are the 2 big teams to watch to go into 5 ahead of Carolina. So that's the way I see it playing out. New Orleans is another one. Pittsburgh would probably like to move up, but I don't think they have enough ammo to move up into 5 or 7. So I think you're limited to teams. And again, the Giants probably don't want to move out of the top 10 if they don't have to, unless they get like a sweetheart deal, as we were talking about with the Saints. So I think those are the teams that really have the best shot of moving up.
And you imagine that 5th pick probably has a lot more value than the 7th just because of the Panthers at 6 and the chance they pick a quarterback, right?
Well, I think if you're a team not looking, I mean, the 5th has more value for a team looking for a quarterback. Yes, absolutely. I think that's, typically how teams move up. They're looking for teams that have similar needs and they try to get ahead of them to make that pick. So I think, well, another example for, fans of other teams who might be watching, the Packers at 22, everybody in the league knows they need a wide receiver. The Patriots at 21, they like moving down. So like, I can imagine the Patriots getting all kinds of phone calls for that. So those are the types of situations that usually happen.
One other team that I think is interesting for potential trade up, Chad, are the Chargers. The AFC West has just gone through this whole arms race, right? This offseason. Everyone is trying to stock up. It's by far the best division of football. What a nightmare. If you're a defensive coordinator in that division, good luck.
Right.
God be with you. So will the Chargers, you think, if they see a couple of those tackles go off the board early, they don't want to have to run out Storm Norton and get a right tackle. That was a nightmare for them last year. Do you think they could move up looking for one of those offensive tackles if they do drop a little bit? Or do you think they're not going to want to move the draft capital? It's going to be necessary to do that.
The Chargers haven't made a lot of trades in recent years. I mean, it's certainly a possibility because, as you say, let's just say that they love Charles Cross and they don't think they don't want like the Texans to take him at 13 or something like that.
Or the Saints, right?
Or the Saints. Yeah. Exactly. So, that would be a perfect situation. But I think the Chargers have actually been pretty good at letting the draft come to them and pick up guys that fall into their area that people wouldn't necessarily think. I also think that they may actually look for a corner in the first round as well as tackle. Another guy like Trevor Penning, for example, from Northern Iowa, he could fit in well with them. And I think will be available at 17. And another way that they could do this is they could take a guard and move Matt Filer outside. Yeah. So they have a lot of different things. Or Kenyon Green would be a guy, if they look at him in the middle of the first round, they could play him at right tackle if they wanted to, or they could. So I think they have a lot of options there, and they don't necessarily have to move up to get a guy that they want and give up that draft capital.
And to your point, Rashawn Slater fell right in their lap last year, and they waited.
I did a podcast with the Chargers website, and they asked, who are they going to take? I said, Rashawn Slater. And, they're like, well, I'm not sure he's going to be available. I'm like, look, guys like that fall, and that could be like Charles Cross. A lot of people think he's a great pass protector and all that, but he's not as big, not quite as physical as some of the other guys, maybe that might go a little higher. So you never know.
All right. Now let's dig into the second round here a little bit. So in the second round, in your recent mock, you had the Giants picking George Pickens at 36, who, by the way, I think is really good value. Like, if you told me, Chad, in 3 years, George Pickens has just as good of a career as Drake London, that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. Like, I don't think they're that different. So you could talk about those two specifically, or just generally. How big of a drop-off is it from, like, the first group of wide receivers to the second group? Like, Chris Olave, Sky Moore, how big of a difference is it? Right. To me, I think that's sweet spot for a wide receiver. And now there's a lot of teams that want him now, so it could get dicey with the Chiefs and the Packers and that sort of stuff.
That's right.
In that 30 range.
That's right. And I think you're right. Typically speaking, at any position, the difference between the 23rd, 24th pick in the first round and the 40th pick in the second round is actually pretty minimal. You're really looking for a scheme fit or something like that, or a team needs that make some of these other guys, fall into the early second round. George Pickens could be a first round pick. Looking at the Packers, looking at the Chiefs, I mean, there's a lot of chances of him being a first round pick. But if he was to fall early in the second round, that would be a great deal for any team that gets him, because, without the ACL, and that's the problem with this receiver class, is that there's a lot of talent, but there's a lot of injuries. So what do you do with that? Jameson Williams would have been a top 10 pick for sure, if not for the injury. And he still might be. Pickens, Justin Ross, you don't know how high that guy can go with his injury situation. So there's a lot of guys like that. And you're right. Sky Moore, Jahan Watson, there's a lot of guys in that second round. Christian Watson, Jahan Dotson and Christian Watson. I had them together. But anyway,
by the way, if you could combine Dotson and Watson, they'd be a hell of a player.
That'd be a great player. Yeah. So a lot of value in the top 50 at receiver, I think, this year.
All right, another interesting thing I thought, you had Kenyon Green dropping all the way to 39.
Yeah.
And, for a while he was like, oh, he's the first guard off the board, no question. You watch him on tape and then you saw at the combine, I don't love his movement skills.
Yeah. Right,
which
right.
I think, which is weird because he played left tackle for them, right? You figured, well, why is that going to be a problem? But I agree with you. I think it is. Do you think there's a legitimate shot that he might drop out of that first round and be available to the Giants at 36? Like, do you think Zion is going to be the first one off now?
No, it's interesting because when I wrote this mock draft like 2 weeks ago, basically, and it came out last week, right? So it takes some time to get these things out on the street. But, I agree that Kenyon Green's movement is not overly mobile. But I'll tell you what, I've thought about this over the last week or so, and I've thought about guys like Laken Tomlinson, Joshua Garnett, David DeCastro, some of these guys that didn't have elite mobility, but they had the power. And I think teams may view some of that, depending on what their scheme is, they may really love that. So I can see him going anywhere from, like I said, the Chargers in the middle of the first round into the 40s. Like some teams may view him as more of a Cody Ford type, and he went early in the second round. So he's one of those guys that could really go anywhere in between. The Cowboys, the Cardinals, and the Patriots could pick him in the 20s, or he could end up falling into there. And that kind of stuff happens every year where you're not quite sure if teams are going to be able to match up, their skill set or, where he's going to end up going. So he really could be anywhere in that range.
Do you have Linderbaum in that same area too?
Yeah.
Or will his traits and his scheme fit also scare some teams away where he could have an on? We were talking about him as a top 15 pick 3 months ago, but
yeah,
could he drop too?
I think that was probably wishful thinking. And I love Tyler Linderbaum as a player. He's a lot of fun to watch. But the teams are going to be concerned about his length. And, Garrett Bradbury, when he came out of NC State, mid-first round pick, I think there's going to be some comparisons to him, and he's struggled at times with power because of that lack of length. And if you watch Linderbaum, he can fight. Stronger guys can get into him a little bit and move him. So that might be a concern for some teams. So I think if you get him late first, early second, like Jacksonville could fall into him like at the first pick of the second round. And I think they would love that. And he reminds me a lot of Ryan Khalil, who had a great NFL career as a second round pick, very similar traits. The other thing is that Cam Jurgens from Nebraska is not significantly different as a prospect than Linderbaum. So a team looking for a center could say, hey, if we don't get this guy, like the Ravens, for example, a lot of teams thought they might take Linderbaum early. Well, they may wait and say, hey, look, I might be able to get Cam Jurgens in the second round, and he's a really similar player. So maybe I'll use that pick somewhere else.
Yeah, I think their traits are similar. I think Linderbaum's much more polished at this point, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
If you look at the tape. And, to your point, you have Jurgens at number 33 in your mock. And really, look, I don't know how you see Tyler Smith, but if you see him as a tackle, I see him as a guard.
Yeah.
I believe Jurgens is your only interior, him and Green are your only two interior offensive linemen going in the second round of that mock. Do you think there's going to be that big of a gap before you get to the, Fortners, the Kennards, the
Yeah.
Dylan Parham, Ed Ingram, those guys? Do you think there's going to be that big of a gap there?
Well, I have Joshua as you do from North Carolina as a guard later in the second round. So I do have one in there. And I think somebody will go in that second round. It might be Parham, some of these other guys. But, if you look over time, there's typically not like 5 or 6 interior offensive linemen taken in the second round. Teams usually wait until the third round and they get like some of the elite guys in the second round and then wait a little bit on that. So it's, a lot of this doesn't have anything to do with how good of a player these guys are. It's more positional value and things like that, where they can afford to wait a little bit on the interior line. So I think all those guys are talented. I think Kennard is a tackle, honestly.
Okay.
And I understand why some people put him in guard because he's not like the most mobile guy, but some of the limitations, on the outside, they actually get worse when you move a guy inside because he's got to come out of that stance quickly at guard because that guy's right on him, right? It's different. It's different. So I think he's probably better on the outside, even with his limitations. Tyler Smith is the same thing. I can see why you'd want to move in with guard because he's a really powerful player. And I think he's got more, but he would be better at it than Kennard because he's got more athleticism. So I could see that transition. But Tyler Smith, I think, is like the perfect Seahawks offensive lineman. I think they would love to get that guy because he's huge. It's something to work with. He's raw. They always seem to take those kind of guys.
It's funny, Chad, you said that he reminds me of DJ Fluker a little bit, right?
Right.
He was there
exactly.
for a while.
Yeah. So that's the kind of the role I see Tyler Smith.
How about Raymond, Bernard Raymond, guy you had dropped to the second round? I know a lot. People seem to be all over the place on him. And I think that's an upside pick, right? Former tight end. He hasn't played offensive tackle for that long. Offensive tackles get pushed up. How do you view him, and where do you think he's going to finally come off the board?
He reminds me. Yeah, he reminds me of the Liam Eichenberg, Dylan Radens, last year in that second round, in the middle of the second round.
Sam Cosme, right? That type of area.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's where he goes. He doesn't have great length for his size. He's got some, like, early in September this year, I'm like, God, this guy's really good. Second, third round pick all the time. And then I think people push him a little bit early into the first round, a little bit too far. But I think in the 40s, good pick, a guy, Indianapolis could use that left tackle. And I think he would be a really good pick for them. Actually, it wouldn't surprise me if I see a team move up in the second round. He's the kind of guy that maybe we go get this guy ahead of Indianapolis, something like that.
And by the way, to your previous point, I work with Sean O'Hara and David Deal over here. And they always drill to me, John, just don't assume you can move a tackle to guard. Right. Things move so fast in there. You have to see more in terms of stunts and twists and stuff like that. You're right. I think people make that assumption, Chad, way too much. I think it's a good point. One guy that's not going to move is Abraham Lucas, the offensive tackle from Washington State. Now, he's an interesting evaluation to me because I think because of the system, he can pass protect. But then people keep having Andre Dillard flashbacks the same way they do with Charles Cross, right?
Yeah.
Is Lucas your best, you think, kind of safe second round tackle value where you at least have a pretty good feel where you know what he's capable of doing in pass pro?
Yeah. And the first thing I'd say about that is, I talked with Jess Swartz about this on Sirius one day, and judge the player, not the system,
100%.
and not the uniform, right? That's so hard not to do sometimes. And I found myself doing that with him this year. And I had to stop myself. And I said, look, the guy doesn't get beat ever in pass protection. He was much more of an athlete than I expected at the combine, not just in the drill and not just in the testing, but in the drills. It wouldn't shock me if he ended up going late 1 to Green Bay. It wouldn't. But I think in the middle of the second round, Green Bay is going to be one of those teams looking at him as that guy at right tackle. You stick him in, you forget about him for 5-6 years at least. So I think that's where he's at. Right, his range right now is there.
I think the second group of pass rushers is interesting too. You have Drake Jackson sneaking into the first round at 32 to Detroit. And then, you kind of have a rapid fire, right? Boye Mafe's off the board.
Yeah.
Arnold Ebiketti's off the board. How do you view that kind of next group? And then Ojabo coming off the Achilles injury, he's in that mix.
Right.
How do you view that next mix of edge guys in terms of, when you think they're going to start jumping off? And how you kind of view, compare, and contrast their skill tests, because we haven't talked much about Drake Jackson here, and I think he's an interesting eval.
Yeah, it's really based on scheme more than anything else. Like we knew that with Azeez Ojulari last year, really talented player, but a lot of teams don't want a guy that size on the edge.
Right.
And they've forgotten about all the really good players that have played on the edge at that size. So, teams forget this stuff when they're evaluating. So the Giants got a great pick with him, I think at 50, if I remember that correctly. Yeah. And so I think this group also has a lot of that same stuff going on. Nick Benito from Oklahoma should be a top 50 pick. He's not as big as some teams would want, and he's sort of a tweener, so he may go a little lower, but I think he's a fantastic player. Boy Mafe showed out at the Senior Bowl. I loved his tape when he was in Minnesota this year. I saw him several times. Great stuff from him. Eba Tikwe is had a great year with Penn State as well. Little undersized again, so I don't really see him as teams liking him in the first round. But again, second round, really good. I think that'll start late in the first round, like Green Bay, the Patriots if they've moved back. Kansas City needs an edge rusher really badly. So a lot of these teams late in the first will be looking, and then it'll go right into the second, and we'll see a big run. It's a deep group, so a team can find their flavor. And Jake Jackson, for example, he got moved back and forth all the time at USC. He was up to 275, played really well. Then they asked him to lose weight, get down to the 250s and play more linebacker. But now he's back up in the 270s, which is a good range for him, I think. So if a team wants to play him with his hand down, he's explosive off the edge. He doesn't get nearly enough hype, in my opinion. And I think he could go as early as like 23 to Arizona, maybe. But I think if you get him in the early second round or late in the first round, that's going to be a really good pick down the road.
It's funny you say that. Maybe I caught a couple of the games where he was a little bit bigger, because I almost thought he looked like almost like a guy you want to play, more at like that 4-eye and almost use as a bigger guy.
Yeah, he's like a Kayvon Thibodeau late first round version in some ways, because he's got the strength. He plays really strong, and he does have the length to do that kind of thing. But he was down in the 250s, and then he went back up for his pro day, and I think that's where he should be playing at because of his skill set. But that's why you can't. Everybody says the tape doesn't lie, but it doesn't tell the whole truth. College teams, they force these guys into schemes that they don't necessarily belong in all the time. Another mid-round pass rusher, Myjai Sanders, perfect example. They played a lot of 4-eye, 5 technique with him. That's not what he is. He's an edge rusher. He's got to stand up. He may end up going a little bit later in this draft, just because it was a little weird. He got down to 228 pounds at the combine because he got sick. That's not good if you can get sick and go down to 230. I mean, I'm glad he's feeling okay, and it wasn't that big of a deal, but teams don't want a guy to be 230 if they're going to play him off the edge, unless you're Randy Gregory, right? I mean, that gets teams concerned. So he may go a little bit later, but he could be a really good player. And if you use him correctly, and even Luke Fickell even said that in a press conference, like we may not use him correctly, but that's our scheme. So that, you can't necessarily judge a prospect's NFL future when he's not used correctly in a scheme.
Chad, 2 guys for me that are interesting evaluations, because I almost don't know what position they're going to play, is George Karlaftis, who I think, 4-3 end, but he kind of looks like a 3 technique to me. And then, Cam Thomas, even out of San Diego State, is kind of that bigger tweener type of edge player. So how do you think NFL teams are going to look at those guys who don't have that bendy twitchiness you kind of want from a pass rusher, but they're productive and good players in their own right?
Yeah. And again, every team is going to look at this differently, right? Like the Eagles, for example, I could easily see them taking him in the top 20 because he's very similar to Derek Barnett, another guy that came out of the league and wasn't the twitchiest athlete ever, but he was a lot of power, comes off the edge hard, and he moves as a linebacker. He's not like Karlaftis is not immobile, but like you said, he's not bendy like a lot of teams like, right? So he could go in the top 20 to a team like the Eagles, or he could fall out of the first round altogether. And it's going to be very interesting to see where he goes. To me, like Kansas City, he would be a perfect fit in Kansas City. I mean, his game kind of reminds me of Jared Allen, to be honest. I mean, he's not quite that tall, but like that power off the edge and just relentless, strong hands. Now, the thing is that he doesn't have great length. And that's another thing that might force him out of the first round, kind of smaller arms and stuff like that. So, we'll see what happens, but he's a fantastic player no matter where he's drafted.
I love how you see this tight end class, Chad. I really do. I think in your recent mock, your first two are literally the last two picks of round 2. Yeah. And you cannot have two different players going back to back, right? You have Mr. Traits, Jelani Woods, then you have Mr. Production, Trey McBride, then you have Greg Dulcich, the very long tight end from UCLA going to the Giants in round 3. And then you kind of see more of these guys coming off the board here. So how do you see this tight end group? Do you think there's a chance you might not see any in the first 2 rounds of this draft? And can you find some value in the round 3, beginning of round 4?
Yeah, for sure. I think I was looking at this yesterday, and I think it's a possibility one of these guys ends up in the top 50. Okay, so whether it's Trey McBride, if the Chiefs love him, Greg Dulcich or McBride going to the Vikings, for example, who desperately need a tight end, that's very possible. But I don't know that Jelani Woods is a great example of a guy who's super athletic. He's going to stretch the seams at Virginia. He was forgotten about at Oklahoma State, goes to Virginia, and it's a lot of fun to watch. I don't know if he can turn a 90-degree angle, but maybe it doesn't matter because he just runs down the seam and he just does a crosser where he just kind of takes his time to make that move, right? I mean, 6'7" guy in the red zone, you got to love that.
So. Chad, I don't understand. How did he run a good 3-cone? I watched his tape. I'm like, where did that 3-cone come from? I don't get it.
He struggled even at the combines running routes. Okay. But if you think about it, the 3-cone, and it's why it's not perfect. For those who don't know, it's kind of an L-shaped drill where you're running around cones and you're going in a straight line. Then you're kind of getting around a cone. Then you're going in a straight line. Then you that one turn, you have to go all the way around a cone and then go in a straight line. So there's a lot of straight line there, even though it's used as a change of directions. So it's not necessarily a apples to apples in terms of running all the routes that you would typically want a wide receiver to run. But again, for him, it's not always pretty, but that sort of guy, I can't imagine him getting out of the mid third round. And then later in the draft, you've got all kinds of guys who are going to contribute. Cade Otton from Washington, who would have been a top 60 pick probably, if not for a year where he had no quarterback. He got COVID, missed time, then he was injured. He's going to be a really good 3rd or 4th round pick. Jake Ferguson out of Wisconsin, Jeremy Ruckert out of Ohio State. So many guys in that 3rd or 4th round area this year that teams are going to be able to pick up, which is one reason they don't necessarily have to use a top 50 pick to get them, because they know they can hit that a little bit later in the draft.
A couple more positions I want to touch with you here, Chad. Am I wrong to think rounds 2 and 3 is kind of a graveyard for cornerbacks this year? I just don't see a lot of guys I love in that area, especially if you get those 4 or 5 that usually go in the, if Kyer Elam gets moved up, if Booth gets moved up and McDuffie are gone, I just don't see much value in the 2nd and 3rd rounds at cornerbacks here.
Well, I think a guy like Kyler Gordon from Washington,
I think he's the one guy.
Second. Yeah. Kyler Gordon from Washington. I think, another guy will fall out of the first round, like Kyer Elam, for example, from Florida. Typically, there's one SEC cornerback that doesn't go as high as everybody thinks. That could be him. Roger McCreary, if he doesn't go in the first round because of his length, then he's going to be a steal for somebody in the 2nd round. He's a really fine player. He's just not the longest player of all time in terms of arm. Tariq Woolen from Texas San Antonio is going to be a late 2nd, early 3rd round guy. Not the greatest tape, but a lot of physical traits that you can work with, much like Athkello Witherspoon coming out of Colorado, I think a couple of years ago, right, with the 49ers. So there's some guys. Tariq Castro Fields from Penn State actually is kind of an underrated player in terms of a guy that you just want to go out there and play man coverage. He can play in the slot, super athletic guy. I don't know if I trust him in his zone really too much, but I think if he's a 3rd guy, I think so. A 3rd round pick for him, just going out and covering, just staying with the guy all over the field. He can do that. Cam Taylor-Britt's another guy from Nebraska who could play corner or safety, depending on the system. He could be like a Seattle type corner, just like trying to take a guy out on the outside. So I think there's some value in there, but I wouldn't say it's loaded with talent. No.
All right. What position I do think is loaded in talent on day 2, Chad, is linebacker. Yeah. Chad Muma, Christian Harris, the kid from Oklahoma, the 18,000 Georgia linebackers that are coming out.
That's right. That's right.
And Troy Anderson. but I do think it's also a deal where you're going to have to fit what a team wants, right? Do you want the bigger guy? Do you want the faster guy? Is he a Mike? Is he a 3-4? Is he a Sam, a Will? Can you just kind of talk about that group and how there's really, whatever a team may want, there's going to be someone to kind of choose from in that group?
That's right. And I think like the Patriots, Leo Chanel from Wisconsin, super athletic guy, can do a little bit of everything. Won't be like maybe a top 50 pick, but he's just going to be a really solid pro for a long time and a much better athlete than people gave him credit for. The guys that you talked about, Chad Muma from Wyoming, fantastic. He, again, another do-it-all kind of guy, just chases the ball all over the field, works well in coverage. Brian Asamoah from Oklahoma, not the biggest guy, so he may not end up going like second round, but maybe third or fourth round. But again, just a guy that gets after the football and he's got game speed. Nakobe Dean from Georgia is a guy that may not even go in the first round because he does not going to maybe test that great. He's been dealing with an injury, didn't look that fluid in his drills sometimes at the pro day, didn't work out, blah, 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 blah. He's just going to be one of these second round, smaller linebackers, just going to have a great career. Like, Nick Bolton is a perfect example, went to the Chiefs in this late second round last year, fantastic player at Missouri. He's 5'11", and so we're not going to take him early. Well, that's not always very smart. So I think there's a bunch of different guys that can fill a whole bunch of different roles. Troy Anderson, as you mentioned, from Montana State, he may be a better player on offense than he is on defense. I'll be really surprised. I won't be surprised if somebody tries him at tight end. I really won't. As a linebacker, he's a good chase guy. I don't know if he's the most physical linebacker I've ever seen. So I think he had that tape in the national championship game in that first half wasn't very good. So if you watch him, he could, and he was a former quarterback and he did all that stuff at Montana State. So it wouldn't shock me if he got moved over to the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, for me, he's a space coverage linebacker. He doesn't attack the line well enough, attack blocks. I'm with you on that, Chad, 100%. Running backs. After Hall and the Michigan State kid, where do you think value starts meeting what's going to be available here?
I think one more. I think James Cook from Georgia's got a chance to go late too, just because teams could use a guy like that. Kansas City, they signed Ronald Jones, so maybe Tampa Bay. I mean, Gio Bernard's okay in that role, but I think they might get younger, so they could look at him. Buffalo could use a guy like that at the running back spot. So I think James Cook's probably the next best guy. And then that's a position where teams can really wait this year. And so it wouldn't surprise me if it was a while before another one was taken. Pierre Strong from South Dakota State, Zamir White from Georgia, depending on the type of back you want. And again, this is the same thing with a lot of other positions. Like if you want a bull, you take Zamir White from Georgia because he's a bull. If you want more of an outside presence, you take a Pierre Strong. Just depending on what you want at that position. And you're going to go into the fifth round. There are going to be guys picked in the fifth round that you could honestly see late third, early first, or early fourth. At the running back spot. So a lot of value there in the middle of the draft.
All right, Chad, let's close with this and go for full circle. Give me your most realistic where you think those top 4 picks in the draft are going to go and what's going to be staring the Giants in the face at 5 and 7 and what they might walk away with.
Yeah, I think you're going to have Aiden Hutchinson and Travon Walker. And I think one of the offensive tackles will go early. So it's Ekwonu or Neal, probably one of those two. And I still think one of those quarterbacks are going to be picked in the top 4. So those are your top 4 guys. So that means you're looking at one of the offensive tackles, either Neal or Ekwonu for the Giants at 5. You've got Ahmad Gardner, the cornerback, would be a good pick for him. So I think those would be the main 2 guys. Kyle Hamilton, I would have put to the Giants. I'm not sure. I'm torn between whether the athleticism is actually going to, like the poor 40 time is going to hurt him because he's a really good player.
Yeah.
And Jamal Adams didn't test that differently when he came out. So I think there's a chance that a team like the Giants could look at him at 7 as well as him dropping a little bit. So he's kind of one of those weird evaluations I'm not sure what to do with, but I think those are the guys that they would be looking at if they stay at 5 and 7.
And you think Thibodeau could be in the mix there too, right? If he drops?
Absolutely. He's absolutely in that range. If he doesn't go in one of those top 4 spots, I'm not sure that he will. But because he kind of reminds me of like a Josh Allen, somebody like that who went 7th. So, if he went 7, it wouldn't surprise me in this draft.
Chad, this was fantastic. I love chopping it up with you. Tell the folks where they can find you, your work, and everything that you're doing.
Just go to NFL.com. We've got all kinds of great guys doing great work there. I've got a 4-round mock. I'll have a 7-round mock coming out next week, next Friday. And some other articles. I have a top 2 players, ideal players for each team. And I'll have other stuff coming out. I'll do my draft grades, which everybody will hate, and that's fine. That comes out immediately after the draft. Like, John, that's all I do during the draft is type those grades. And then as soon as the draft is over, I hand it in. I don't get time to think about it, as much other than overnight or whatever. I can think about it a little bit, but anyway, so yeah, those snap grades will come out each day after the draft. Day 1, handed it immediately. Day 2, handed it immediately. So, take them for what they're worth, but that's the stuff I'll be working on in the next couple of weeks.
I said at the start that this man enjoys pain, and those snap grades, I can only imagine. No one's ever happy with them, generally speaking, I would think. So
yeah, even your dream job have nightmares sometimes, right? So it's all good.
And Chad, I think we might be seeing you pop on NFL Network a little bit next couple of weeks too, right?
Who knows? I we'll see what happens, but
awesome.
We have a lot of good, honestly, we have a lot of good people that do all that stuff. So I'm good just hanging in the background. I'm fine with that. And just putting in my stuff and doing what I can. So, but if they want me to come on, I'm happy to do that too. Team player, John, team player.
He is a worker bee. Chad Reuter, check him out at NFL.com. We thank you for joining us on the Giants Huddle podcast. Everybody stay tuned as we continue to cover the NFL draft just over a week away on Giants.com and all of our digital platforms.